welcome to the latest edition of SO Live. I'm Danny Flexen, and I'm delighted to be joined by Mr. Ayman Khan. Ayman, how the devil are you?
I am very, very well. You could say, Danny, that I am primed and ready to go.
I've got a question. We're biased out here at Seconds Out, as anyone who's seen our intro knows, and I've got to question your impartiality rocking up to this podcast, debating the future of the Prime card and influencer boxing in general when you rock up wearing that.
Well, I'm just saying, I had to freshen things up. I was getting a bit of stick, I think, from yourself and a couple of people in the chat saying he's wearing the same hat every single time. I got a new one now, and it's pretty good to me.
God forbid you get a haircut. This is SO Live. We are the most interactive show on boxing YouTube, so we want you to get in your likes, comments, subscribe if you haven't already, but most importantly, those comments and any questions you've got for us. We are going to be talking about the Prime card and crossover boxing in general. Ayman was there. I wasn't. I haven't seen it. I'm going to be completely open and honest from the start. I couldn't bring myself to watch it. I've seen clips, of course, on social media and so on. But the reason we're talking about whether it's jumped the shark, quote unquote, is because I saw a huge number of negative comments across different social media platforms over the weekend. I was kind of following the show on Twitter for the most part. I do still go on Twitter, albeit in the Seconds Out account. And yeah, there didn't seem to be a lot of positive feedback on the Prime card. Ayman, just give us your overview, first of all.
I think in terms of the card as a whole and the event as a whole, the spectacle as a whole, I thought it delivered for a fan who's interested in that crossover sphere and following their favorite influencers into the ring and watching them and, buying their products and seeing them. I think you got what you wanted. You got a WrestleMania-esque event. You got treated. That's what you got. You got treated. Boxing fans, we get abused. Crossover fans, you get treated to an event like this. You had music, you had knockouts, you had entertainment. Yes, sure, the top two fights didn't deliver in terms of actual in-ring action, but the fans were still into it. If you know a little bit about boxing, you probably would have realized that maybe those two fights wouldn't have delivered anyway. But all in all, I think if you bought a ticket, I don't know quite what the prices were, but if you did buy a ticket, I think you were entertained.
I mean, the fact that the spectacle was there, the showmanship was there, but the in-ring action left a lot to be desired, lends itself to your WrestleMania analogy, I guess. Certainly in the first few years of WrestleMania, WrestleMania 1 and 2 were, objectively speaking, piles of shit. Separate, but, pretty much equal piles of shit. However, WWE did evolve, and WrestleMania is still a massive spectacle. It's even bigger than it ever was before. But the in-ring action has kind of caught up as well. But let's go to some of the comments. Andre Rudenko, that well-known journeyman heavyweight, says a lot of domestic-level fighters and female fighters digging out the quality of influencer boxing when they're more competitive than any fights they've been in so far. Yeah, I mean, if you want competitive fights, I would argue there's other places you can go for a lot less money to see competitive fights, whether that's outside your local pub or even on a white-collar show. But I do take your point. L. Lou says, do you think KSI beat Tommy or was it a draw in your opinion? And what about the new results? The judge who scored the match a draw got it wrong, meant to judge the same as the other judge. Yeah, we'll talk about the actual result of the fight shortly. And Dr. Dingbat, quite like that. That's my favourite so far. Says, isn't it ironic that KSI said he wants an appeal and it's been overturned to a majority decision? Ha ha. I don't think anyone really thought there was going to be any competitive boxing. Yeah, I mean, I understand. I'm not sure what to say about that. Andre Rudenko says, having an exciting trailer and lively premiere, but the film then being shite isn't value for money. Yeah, I mean, I guess Ayman was saying that the whole spectacle and the glitz and the glamour carried on throughout the event, not just in the pre-fight build-up. Heisenberg says it's been overturned to a unanimous decision, mate, not majority, and it's only because the judges were too incompetent to add the numbers up. All right, go easy on Dr. Dingbat. My new favourite name. Ayman, let's talk about the fights themselves, starting with the main event, and we'll get into the detail of what actually happened. Did you think the result was fair? And what do you make of the judge who didn't seem to know how to add up the scores correctly? Ayman, can you hear me? Well, this doesn't bode well.
No, sorry, it was my fault. Amateur hour from me. I didn't click mute, so that was my bad.
You're wearing a prime cap as well. You've lost your endorsement now.
I was just going to say that the Creever asked us in the build-up, is there going to be 3 of us turning up? I said, no, it's the Gruesome Toos and Danny and I. My cat just meowed, but you just missed it because I obviously had that not on unmuted. So there is 3 of us in here at the moment. But you're getting into the card itself exactly at the top of the event, KSI vs Fury. Look, to be honest with you, it's actually quite difficult to score, being that there was quite a few fights that were going on and all the security were all up. So we couldn't really see all that much from our vantage point, that where we were in the media section. So it was actually quite hard to for us to get a real grasp on it. I've not actually watched it back myself.
Small mercy, some might say.
Yeah, that's right. A small mercy indeed. But look, I don't think this was a robbery by any means from what I did see. I think if you're a fan here and we're talking about, the premiere and the film being shit, a lot of excuses have been made to protect KSI, but really look, engaged a lot of the clinches, didn't really engage in a lot of action himself, did a lot of hugging. And in those moments, who can you really pick? Who can you pick in a fight like that? If anything, I think that was the best avenue for success for KSI to make it clinical, because a clean fight against Tommy Fury, then he's in real trouble. So I think this is probably the best outcome for KSI, because you can sort of make the excuse of the robbery. People can feed him that information, keep him interested now that he's lost. He hates losing, as he said, and I think a lot of that is to do with the fact that he is hyper competitive, got himself in brilliant shape, didn't get the outcome. Maybe he can go again for a rematch, but look, he probably should have got a warning for hugging. He probably should have engaged more. He probably should have been cleaner his work. But ultimately, I don't think he has anything to really hang on to in his claim of a robbery.
We'll talk about that judge's scorecard in a sec. Let's go to some of the comments. Ainsley Shand says it's all rubbish. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. They was both crap. Fair enough. Elton Gunn, any relation to Colton and Austin and Billy, of course, you let us know. Said, should the refs on these shows do more to enforce the mark of the Queensberry rules? I mean, it's an interesting question because they're not governed by the British Boxing Board of Control. They're under no real obligation to do so, but you would like it to make sense to the viewers at home, especially those who haven't watched boxing, who are just casual fans who are dipping in and out. You'd want the scores to add up at least, but we'll talk to Ayman about his view on that in a minute. Ainsley Shand goes on, I've boxed on and off for 23 years. My youngest is 8 and he boxes. He told me to turn that rubbish off after 3 rounds. I mean, he managed 3 rounds. Let's look at the positives here. He's obviously got some stamina, so maybe he'll make it in the sport. Cheyenne the Bomber Shand, he's 8 years old. Remember the name. Fair enough. Tony Bellew fan, I'm guessing. We know he always wanted to get home safe to his wife and kids, and he did. So maybe he's a kid's favourite these days. Ayman, yeah, what did you make of the judge seemingly making a mistake tabulating the scorecards? And does this kind of underline a little bit, gives more fuel to the critics who claim this is amateur hour?
Yeah, look, a lot of people kind of criticize, the PBA being used, and Jake Paul is a leading criticizer of the PBA. He says that he doesn't want to fight KSI unless it's under the British Boxing Board of Control's auspices. He sees a legitimate route to having fights, and the British Boxing Board of Control obviously don't want to get involved in the influence of seeing the PBA do. The PBA are giving the opportunity for these fights to happen. And look, I don't know. Again, it's hard to kind of judge for me in terms of actually seeing the fight. From what I can recollect, the first round I gave to Tommy. The second round I probably gave to KSI. Then the rest I gave to Tommy Fury. So it was a bit of a difficult kind of one to really kind of get a grasp on, to be honest with you. But I just think the bottom line here is, and you know what, actually, to be fair, give KSI a little bit of credence as well too, in terms of what he was saying post-fight. A lot of people point the finger and say he's a bit of a sore loser, and like I mentioned, he is hyper-competitive. But he made a bit of a point, to be honest with you. Tommy Fury is a pro boxer who's looking to now return to the pro boxing route. Should a pro boxer really be happy with the way that they've beaten KSI and not knocked him out? That's a fair point in my book, I think, Danny.
Well, that's pretty much what Andre Rudenko said here in the comments. He says it's too easy to say the opponent didn't want to fight. Tommy really should have been able to deal with that. Looked pretty clueless against KSI. Weird tactics, wasn't a good look. Yeah, I mean, I understand the pressure. I haven't seen it, obviously, but the pressure is on Tommy in fights like this to make the fight, if you like, to be the aggressor, to, dictate the pace. He is the more experienced person. If they're like, you see them as dance partners to an extent. You would expect him to kind of lead KSI into the manner in which he wanted, rather than be dictated to by a novice who's liable to clinch. And especially after having the experience of the Jake Paul fight, where he dealt with someone. You can argue about how well he dealt with him, but he had the experience of competing against someone who wasn't versed in the technical nuances of boxing, and he got through it. And you would have thought he'd be better for that experience, but perhaps didn't show it in this fight. Ayman, do you think anyone in the main 2 fights, so 4 fighters total, do you think any of them emerged with credit? Do you think any of them came out of it better than they were going in?
Oh, that's a good question, actually, to be fair, Danny. I'm inclined to initially react and say to you, no, not really. We've addressed Tommy Fury and his criticisms, and look, I suppose Tommy Fury did what he needed to do, because if he ended up on a defeat to KSI or being knocked out by KSI, then there's a real big problem. Then we're criticized. We get made a mockery of, because we're the traditional boxing fans, and look at the traditional boxing guy who's been knocked out, who's been KO'd. That's a real problem. So to be fair, I guess we can praise Tommy for not embarrassing us in that sort of sense. Otherwise, I guess because he claimed the KO and didn't get the KO, and we're kind of expecting the levels to be apparent. That's a bit of a shame that didn't happen. KSI, look, it can be spun around, and it has been spun around by the Twitter audiences and the social media audiences to say, look, he's hung in with a professional boxer. Look at him. He's improved. Look at where he was. Look what he's doing now. So I think you could probably claim a little bit of credit there. Dylan Danis, no, not really. He has to be credited. We can talk about the ins and outs of how he's promoted the fight, but this guy promoted the fight. He didn't come to fight, but he promoted the fight. So in that sense, he gets credit as a boxer. I don't get this thing as well, Danny. There's something I want to pick as well too. A lot of people online say, blah, blah, blah was terrible. He should never be in the ring again. Get him out of it. He doesn't know how to box. Wait a minute. Isn't this a sport that we want people to go to gyms, to box, to improve, to get themselves healthy, to get themselves fit? We should be saying, he's rubbish. Get back in the gym. Keep boxing. Try and improve yourself. Get better. Not never box again. I don't get that at all. Logan Paul looked about the same Logan Paul as we've seen before as well. So not really, not in any boxing sense, not really to give much credit to either of them in the top 4. On the undercard, you can definitely. Let me just make a quick mention of Dean the Great. Looked brilliant. Slim, who's linked up with Andre Rozier, looked brilliant after the first 2 rounds. A lot to do with Salt's weight as well too. Not much credit to go around, really.
Yeah, Rob Dyer says KSI lost, but Tommy couldn't win a Central Area title. Yeah, I mean, Ricky Reeves is the current Central Area Cruiserweight champion. I just Googled that because I did look before. I think I tried to set up an interview with him because that was the whole kind of argument, could Tommy Fury win a Central Area? And if they fought now, I probably would favour Ricky Reeves to win. But he's a good fighter, I don't know how much of a slur that is on Tommy's name that he couldn't win a Central Area. Ainsley Shand again says it's hard to box a novice. It's hard to read them. Yeah, true. That's what all my sparring partners
say. Let me jump in there though, Danny. The Furies make a thing to bring in novices because they're so wiry, because they're so wild, to give them that opportunity to defend and keep them sharp. So that base should have been covered by the Furies, and I imagine it was.
Yeah, fair enough. Boxing 24/7 says Fury said he was done with this BS. Next sentence, he calls out Logan. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute, about Tommy Fury's kind of mixed messaging following the show. My Very Happy Day says, abysmal boxing matches. Why are you wasting time talking about it? Get a life. To that, My Very Happy Day, I would say, why are you wasting time castigating us for talking about it? You get a life. Please don't. Please stay. I was just kidding. Ainsley Shand says, oh no, he's just crediting Boxing 24/7, who goes on to say, anyone who said this was a joke fight before has to critique Fury's performance. Weren't we saying it was a mismatch? Dr. Dingbat says what looks good on paper doesn't always transfer to the ring. Styles make fights. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much they think about that in the crossover realm of styles make fights. I think it's more what makes the most money. And Tommy Fury, having beaten Jake Paul against KSI here in the UK, was always the biggest cash cow for Misfits at this moment in time. And I don't begrudge either of them from making the money they make. You can't blame Tommy Fury for not targeting the Central Area title or the English title and so on if he's making millions fighting people he's widely expected to beat, because going into a Central Area title fight, English, British, he wouldn't be a favourite. It wouldn't even be close. So, you know, you can understand it from a business perspective, but more from a fan perspective, and whether it's going to continue to be a huge money-making endeavour, that I'm not quite so sure about, given the negative, mostly negative reaction to what occurred on Saturday night. But yeah, Tommy did say, I've seen various things, but he said after the fight, he'll never forgive himself if he doesn't at least try and become a world champion. That was always his dream. But then he is still talking about potentially fighting Logan Paul, and maybe a rematch with Jake Paul as well. And that's something his dad and trainer John Fury said several times, including to us on the channel, that he wants to stay within the Misfits kind of universe, if you like, and fight people like, not him personally, but have Tommy fight Jake Paul again and fight Logan Paul. So, yeah, it's an interesting one, Ayman. What do you think he does next?
I think he fights Logan Paul. I think he fights Logan Paul probably towards mid of next year and continues to get the bag. I can't imagine like Tommy Fury having fought Jake Paul and KSI. Was it Jake Paul earlier this year or back in last year? I can't remember when it was, but whatever. Having fought Jake Paul, having fought KSI, and not coming out with millions and millions of pounds and thinking, there's another fight for me to win for very little risk, really, or damage, really, and a lot of reward. Why wouldn't you do it? Why wouldn't you do it? Really? Especially, look, if people are saying, look, he's got a ways to go if he's want to get to the Central Area and such, then make the bag at this level. Why not? Like, that's what it's all about at the end of the day. And I tend to believe I would treat. I know that a lot of things are said to sell fights from the Fury team as a whole, but I take it at face value that Tommy Fury does want to give it a crack in the legitimate ranks. I think he will give it a crack at the legitimate ranks. And look, if he doesn't make his money, he doesn't make his money in the pro ranks, but he will have in here. So what really is the issue here for a young fighter, a young man who's really the new Posh and Bex, him and Molly Meg Hay? I don't know how you say her name.
Posh and Bex, but you can't even remember her name.
I don't particularly care. You know what I mean, but I don't particularly care about that sort of scene. Do you buy those OK magazines and Hello magazines, Danny? Is that how you keep abreast?
I often see them. Let's not talk about me keeping abreast. I often see them, supermarkets and stuff as I'm queuing for the checkout. But yeah, I mean, I know Victoria Beckham is. Let's be real. So, no disrespect to Molly May Hague. I'm sure she's great at what she does. She does like fashion design, does she? Or modeling?
You read the mags,
I'm not really clued up, but I watched the Beckham documentary recently, just as an aside, and it's really, really good. So Quiet T-Rex says, KSI hugs too much. He should push more, which I thought was quite funny. Alan York says, Fury is an average boxer. End of. I assume he means Tommy and not Tyson. Although there's a load of Furies. I saw a bunch of those got interviewed after the fight as well. I quite like Roman Fury, actually. He's a cool guy. Ainsley Shan, Tommy is rubbish, bottom line. I know some unlicensed guys would do him, no joke. I'm sure there's plenty of people on the unlicensed circuit that could beat selected pros, to be fair. There's some good unlicensed fighters out there. Andre Rudenko, Tommy was landing stiff jab more and more. I think he could have had success with left hook, uppercut. Was he holding back? I'll ask Ayman about that in a minute, because I was thinking about that when I was seeing the commentary on the night. Quiet T-Rex, if KSI pushed more of the big jabs, I think KSI would have won. Tommy Fury was really bad for a pro. Dr. Dingbat, KSI fights Jake Paul. Tommy Fury fights Logan. 100%. Before I go back to Ayman on that particular point, I just want to introduce our poll. So we're asking very simply, because this is a subject we're going to turn to in a few minutes. Has crossover boxing jumped the shark? Yes or no? For those of you not as hip and down with the kids as I am, jumping the shark means when something's kind of outlived its usefulness, when it's not cool anymore. So let us know what you think. Ayman, yeah, on that point, do we think there's a chance that Tommy was holding back to make it close enough to warrant a rematch, perhaps? Keep KSI's career going, maybe some sort of pre-fight agreement to help them both make lots of money? What do you think?
I really don't doubt that. Again, like if I have like a sniff of it, I have no problem to say something along those lines. But like, how do you really orchestrate that? How do you really kind of guise that in terms of Tommy? If we're acknowledging that Tommy Fury is a novice pro and has a limited skill set and limited understanding right now, and is looking to improve on that, then it plays out as it should do realistically as someone who wasn't able to deal with something because they're where they are right now in their boxing career. That's what is more likely to me, that it just was a fight where, you know, he wasn't able to handle and land anything clean on someone who was awkward for him, someone who was not orthodox for him, someone who has a karate stance, which they mock him for. That's what it was for me. It wasn't something that was orchestrated, I believe. Way too much risk, really. I think the Furies, look, again, you can ridicule them. For a lot of people will ridicule the Furies for the amount of stuff that they say. But the amount of ridicule they would have received had Tommy Fury been defeated by KSI, had he been knocked out or something along those lines, way too risky, I think, for the Furies to want to take on.
Dr. Dimback says, don't forget that Tommy is a novice. I mean, we've been talking about it for 20 minutes. He only had 8 fights before. Yeah, but he's had a few amateur fights as well. He's not, you know, total newcomer to the sport. KSI's whole game plan was to take the jab away, slip in and out and clinch. Well, that's what they said. I mean, it seems quite effective, really, from what I've been hearing. Ainsley says, Tommy's dad don't help making him out to be something he's not. Yeah, I mean, I think fathers of boxers who are also involved in their career have got a long history of over-promoting their kid. So that's not a huge surprise. Plus, I don't want to criticise John too harshly in case, you know, he doesn't want to do an interview with me again, or worse still, he gouges my eye out. Dr. Dingbat says, he said after the fight, Tommy is only a novice. Yeah, I mean, it's the narrative that suits, I suppose. Lucan, although Tommy Fury won KSI and Jake Paul fights, they are losses, to be honest. Understand what you mean. You know, if there's such a thing as a moral victor, is Tommy Fury a moral loser in those two occasions? Andre Rodenko, do we think boxing is much harder than it actually is then, if KSI can compete against someone who's been training all his life? If this was any other sport, the golfing class would be massive. Yeah, I think that's fair. You know, going back to the David Beckham documentary, which I was talking about just now, he comments on how poor the standard was when he went to America to play in comparison to what he'd been used to in other countries, including the Premier League, of course. And it was a real adjustment period for him, you know, and some of the players that played with him out there as well were saying the same thing, that, you know, they knew they weren't up to his standard, and he had certain expectations of his teammates that couldn't be, you know, reached by these people around, these journeyman professionals. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a difficult one because, yeah, it does make boxing, and I've said this about crossover boxing throughout, is that it makes boxing look maybe not easy, but certainly more accessible, more achievable to the average man than perhaps it should. And I think maybe, you know, Tommy Fury, whether it's a lack of motivation, whether he is kind of carrying opponents to an extent, or whether he's just not particularly good yet, he hasn't developed as much yet, I'm not sure he's the right barometer to be using for any of those assumptions. Dr. Dimbat says, before any fight, whatever he said is usually just to sell the fight. Well said. Alan York, people around Tommy Fury know he's not good enough to reach the top in boxing. Quiet T-Rex, seeing Tyson Fury's face even have a surprise that Tommy won. Maybe, but Tyson knows how to play the game as well. He probably invented parts of it. The Colourful Musician, it's his first one today, says, genuinely think this will hurt his ego going on. Yeah, but you've got to weigh ego up against bank balance, I think, in this case. Lucan says, is that the new conspiracy? Tommy was holding back in the KSI fight to get a rematch. I haven't even seen the fight, so I don't want to be accused of starting any conspiracies. I just think, you know, that's something that people can consider. SW Boxing, our good friend, says, more crossover boxing needed. Ignore the haters. Haters with a Z. Steve, you're better than that, mate. Come on. I thought you were. Where are those days? Humble farm boy with a goat in the backyard. Times changed. And so have you. Ayman, let's switch to kind of our next topic or linked topic, which is the title. Has crossover boxing jumped the shark? And I asked this because there was a huge build-up to Fury against Jake Paul earlier this year. Massive event, great for our channel. Did massive numbers on pay-per-view. I imagine this will do similar, if not better, because it's in UK appeal, UK time zone. And yet there was so much negative feedback both during the show and on the Sunday that it seems like maybe the bubble's burst now to this hardcore boxing fan, crossover outsider. What do you think?
Look, I don't know. It depends, really. Your Twitter feed will kind of be a reflection of where you, I suppose, stand on it. Maybe Danny, and getting all the negativity. I understand that obviously people in our boxing media world didn't like this scene at all. So from that point of view, you're going to get the trash. You're going to get people, tearing down the event. You're going to get people hating on the event. The bottom line is, if I'm hearing what I'm hearing about the numbers, it did anywhere between something around 800,000. If that's the bottom end, it's not great for the bottom end, but it's great for pay-per-view, all the way up to the top end where I've heard millions is done, around 1 million, as in 2 millions is done. I'm inclined to take that number as a pinch of salt and maybe inclined to believe somewhere around the 800 to 1.2 or 1.5 mark as a barometer. But if you look at those numbers, and if you look at DAZN's metrics and what DAZN wants, a broadcaster is looking to establish themselves in the UK without Premier League rights, and are going, wow, this has done these numbers, this has garnered this interest social media wise. Why would you not want more of it? Why would you think that this is done, the bubbles burst, and rather be thinking, we need more of this, we need to get more of this to drive our subscribers, to push it on, and keep feeding something that traditional boxing isn't giving us right now, isn't giving us those eyes. So look, people, all I think we saw was because we got everything over the weekend. We got the OnlyFans stars. People don't want to see that. We got the amateur people who shouldn't belong in the ring, really. We got that. We got knockouts that we don't want to see because there were mismatches and, maybe some dangerous fights there. All that's there. You got some good skill, to be fair, for the level that we saw from Dean the Great. And we got some terrible fights that didn't deliver, like we get in boxing all the time. But you got everything there. So there's always time to rip apart everything. But the bottom line will be the people who are paying and the people who are receiving and the people who are looking to grow, and that's DAZN. And I think they'll look at that very happily and want more of it.
I've got some counterpoints to that because I'm the one not wearing a Prime hat, in case people haven't noticed. But before we do, a very serious point from Believe John 316. He says, just read that Conor Coghill is in hospital with a bleed on the brain after his fight last week. I believe, did he fight Hopi Price?
That's right.
Steffi Ball posted that on X. I'm assuming that's true. There's no reason to make something like that up. All our thoughts, prayers, if you're someone who prays, are with Conor Coghill, and we hope he makes a full and speedy recovery. Ainsley Chand asks me, I'm assuming, are you going to watch the fight? I'd say it's very unlikely. SW Boxing, right, I'm off. Hopefully back to the farm, Steve. Lucan says, Tommy Fury might be a novice, but not your average novice. In the sense, not too many novices grew up around boxing. Completely agree with that. Mega Shadow YouTube says, what are your thoughts on the undercard fights like Slim versus Salt Pappy? We'll get Ayman's thoughts on that shortly, although he's already talked about some of the highlights of the undercard, including Slim. He's with Andre Rozier, you were saying now, which is pretty impressive company to keep. And Dean the Great as well. Dr. Dingbat, look at Hughie Fury and look at Tommy Fury and tell me why their career paths are so different. Then the answer will tell you about why he's boxing at the level he is. I think that's part of it, but then I think Hughie Fury could have been managed a bit better throughout his career. He hasn't always had top promotional backing. He's often had to go to away turf for his big fights as well. So, he's probably made less money in his career so far than Tommy as well. The Colourful Musician, if you watch professional boxing, it's clear that these influencers are below par. Don't know how Tommy was on the same level of these guys. Intriguing. JJ was clearly very unorthodox. Yeah, it's partly that. Maybe he's fighting down to the level of opposition as well. Dopamines, I saw people saying it was a £20 rip-off. Not in that world. That world, £20 is a steal. I mean, compared to what they pay in the US for pay-per-views, £20 is absolutely great. Andre Rodenko, would it make sense for the zone to have different budget for misfits than real boxing? What stops misfits demanding more percentage of the share of... Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Because it does seem, and I've made this point before, it's possible that misfits now is subsidising the zone's boxing content as a whole. We don't know that for sure, though. Ainsley Shand is asking me to watch just 3 rounds. Yeah, I mean, like I said, your son's obviously got the stamina to do that. I'm not sure. I think I'd be tapping out. You don't tap out in boxing, do you? I think I'd be retiring on my stool, on my sofa after 1. Quiet T-Rex, do you think some boxers are jealous for the amount of money some of them are making? As on average, Logan Paul and KSI earn more than most boxers per match. Yeah, I think there is a lot of, I'd say envy more than jealousy, but I think that is a big part of why they get criticised. And also the thing that people will assume they are boxers, that KSI, Jake Paul and the like are quote-unquote boxers, so they deserve to be put in the same category as, some of the critics out there, the actual professional boxers. And I get why that would piss you off if you'd worked your whole life to attain a good level of ability and then got to, winning a world title or whatever, and people said, "Oh, you're a boxer? Oh, great, like that Jake Paul." You know, if you got recognised on the street, you probably wouldn't like it very much. But just to counter some of what Ayman was saying there about, you know, DAZN being happy with the product and the rumoured pay-per-view buyers, if a show does, you know, a normal boxing show does 250,000 pay-per-view buyers, but the main event is absolutely amazing, gripping, edge-of-the-seat stuff, you would expect a rematch between those two fighters headlining a pay-per-view to do even more figures and greater live attendance as well. It's just logic. So if 800,000 to 1.2 million watch that Prime card, and I'm assuming it's an ironic title, at the weekend, then surely a lot of them won't be tuning back in for the next show simply because what they was served up in the top two fights on the card, the most famous fighters on the show, was pretty turgid stuff. You know, unless you think they've watched Slim and Dean the Great and some of the better undercard performers, I thought, actually, that's the sort of boxing I want to see. I'll be back next time. The other thing that annoyed me as well, and the price point's really good. That's a definite tick in the Misfits crossover boxing column. But one thing that annoyed me, it seemed like the main event didn't start till nearly midnight. I mean, we're criticising boxing promoters in traditional boxing all the time for late night main events. And when we do that, it's usually about 11 o'clock. You know, they've made a point of saying that the Dan Aziz and Joshua Buatsi main event this weekend, the ring walks will start at 9:45 local time. And we'll be talking about that fight a bit later on. But, you know, if we're criticising people for that, how can we then say, but it's all right when Misfits do it? Is it a different audience maybe that stay up a lot later? That I can accept. But I just think that if you're DAZN or you're a fan and you're one of the 800,000 to 1.2 million, what was there on that card that's going to get you to come back if you were on the fence? Ayman, I'll put that to you.
Yeah, sure. So as of right now, just making those notes. And I think part of the way, maybe the way you see it, is because as boxing fans, when it comes to main events and things, we're let down continually by like shit fights and seen it all before, and we think, oh, you know, this is kind of, don't want to watch that again, not really interested in that again. But this influencer boxing sphere set of fans respectfully don't really know all that much about boxing. I'm not saying that they can't see for themselves that wasn't a great fight. Sure, they know that wasn't a great fight, but the less likely
would have been sitting there bored.
No, maybe in that instance, but I don't think that, because it's like one of the first instances of it happening, they're more likely to give an opportunity to watch another fight again because there's enough rope there, because they haven't been let down continuously. Also, KSI can come back in a video and say, I'm bigger, I'm better than ever, I'm a cleaner fighter, I'm going to entertain you. And they'll eat it all up. They'll believe it and they'll buy the pay-per-view again. Not a problem. And we hear that. We'll hear from a boxer, I'm bigger, I'm better than ever, I'm back with a bang. And we're like, yeah, sure, show us. You know, it's a different kind of sorry, excuse me, different kind of sphere of fans, which I think in its infancy right now, because they haven't been let down continually, because they haven't seen all that much of traditional boxing, won't be too let down by what they were served up, because they were so entertained in the build-up too.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to put myself in that position because I am, you know, a boxing fan. I have been since I was, I don't know, 11, 12 years old. And yeah, you do get used to fights not living up to their expectations. And there is, you know, I am immune to it to an extent now, with that level of disappointment. However, you know, in the crossover realm, I was actually quite, I don't know if excited is the right word, but I was certainly intrigued by Tommy Fury against Jake Paul. You know, I thought it was actually quite I wasn't going in thinking, right, Tommy's going to win this easy. I thought it was a real intriguing contest. I actually enjoyed watching it as well. Thought it was quite entertaining to watch. You know, two raw novices, sure, but I watch raw novices on undercards, and I'm happy enough with that as long as it's competitive and there's not too much clinching. So I was happy with that. But from what I read about the fight, it wasn't great. It was boring. It was a lot of clinching, not a lot of clean punches landed. Going in, I felt that Tommy Fury would win fairly easily. He didn't. Shows what I know about the crossover side. But I wasn't as excited in the build-up to this one as I was to Tommy against Jake Paul. So doesn't crossover boxing, I could be completely wrong, but doesn't it require a modicum of the hardcore fan base to kind of join in for the big events in the same way that hardcore boxing requires a modicum of the casual fan base to join in for their mega events? Is that not how it works?
I really don't think so. Remember that these fans are watching. They're watching what they're watching because they follow and love and have a link with the influencers that they've followed and loved and watched throughout the years through all their content. I don't think they really care what they're doing. They've bought tickets to boxing. They've bought tickets to charity football, low level football, charity football again, whatever it is. To KSI's music. No disrespect to KSI, but it doesn't do anything for me. It's not exactly what I like either. But it goes multi-platinum or whatever. And
Just to expose Ayman, as we're talking about music, he didn't recognise Bugsy Malone at the KSI fight.
I'm on a rock kick right now. 2000s rock. Give me Fall Out Boy. Give me Blink 182. Give me some Deftones. That's what I'm listening to right now. I'm not listening
to
any
of them there. Any of them in the audience?
No. if they were, I would have known. Chris Hansen was there though. It was good to speak to him. I'm glad I was interviewing him and not him not interviewing me. But yeah, no, these are the type of people that are invested in them and will I'm going hyperbole here, but will walk to the end of the earth for them because they love them so much. It doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't matter if they let them down. They'll just come to the next one and do it again. So it's not quite the same way that the traditional boxing sphere operates because, and that's a trick, by the way, just as you were mentioning beforehand, that's a trick that people miss. And that's why the Furies have been so savvy because they know what to say and they know what to do to keep themselves in the headlines. Boxers, for the most part, don't understand how to cut a promo, don't understand how to sell themselves, don't understand to be brutal. They're a product on the shelf, don't know how to sell themselves and get people in their hands. And that's an issue that they're forever missing, a trick that they're forever missing and needs to be learnt by this from what they're seeing last weekend.
Lucan says it's delusional to believe this last Misfits card will have a bunch of skilled boxers. We can't standardise it on real boxing. Yeah, that's fair enough. I don't need to see a bunch of real boxers, but I do like to see competitive fights with a modicum of action. You know, so I think there's a balance between the two. And it's not like the Misfits cards in the past or even some of the Kingpin events when that was happening have been bad necessarily. You know, bad in terms of the talent levels perhaps, but not bad in terms of the entertainment level. Ainsley says, Huey is decent, Tommy's not or even close to that level and he won't get there. That's probably true, but then on the flip side of that is Huey will never become the celebrity and the wealthy person that Tommy is. So it all depends what your goals are in life, I suppose, and what sort of person you are. The Colourful Musician says, I mean, JJ has an ego he'd want to win against Tommy. What do you guys think? Should he move to Jake or prove himself against Tommy again? We'll ask him. Ayman's already said he thinks Tommy will fight Logan next. So maybe KSI will fight Jake, as someone suggests further down. Dopamine says they're like celebrity fights, but better. I don't know. There's a few celebrities out there I'd really like to see get smashed to bits, to be fair. Dr. Dingbat says if they had a dolphin fighting a gorilla in the ring, until then they can keep it. It was fun, but it was disappointing. I'm sure a dolphin would be much good in the ring, to be honest. But don't give them ideas, I guess, is the overriding point there. Quiet T-Rex. Next big boxing match will be Jake versus KSI. See how better he is, I'm guessing. I say on the undercard will Logan Paul versus Tommy Fury. I think Tommy will still box in crossover as there's too much not to. Too much money, I'm guessing he means. Dopamine's congratulating Ayman, I'm guessing, for a good point. And then Ainsley Shan says, what do people think of the stoppage with Warrington and Wood? We're not going to discuss that on this week's episode, Ainsley. We actually covered it last week. But if you want to go back and watch that on playback, we had a very special guest last week as well, talking about KSI Fury. Obviously, you already know the result now, but still, I think you'll find it interesting. So, Ayman, do you expect that? You've already said you expect Tommy to fight Logan Paul. Do you think we'll see Jake Paul KSI? Maybe not on the same card, but next? Ayman, have you muted yourself again?
2 in a row. It's a real collector's item. Right. So getting into my point here, we say that as traditional boxing fans, we get abused, and these crossover boxing fans are getting treated. This is the fight that they want. They have not been treated to this fight as of yet, and I think after Jake Paul lost to Tommy Fury, it put both Jake Paul and KSI, who are really kind of the real thrusters. As with Joe Weller, but Joe Weller completely dropped off. I've got to give Joe Weller his respect. But the real thrusters of this scene, they want to see these two collide, and it's never happened. They've always kind of had these online, as we've seen already in traditional boxing, online back and forth about signing fights and this term and that term, blah, blah, blah. It's never been made, and each side pointing finger at each other. Now that they're both on an even keel where they've both lost, it makes the fight more appealing because one can't have a hook over the other because the two have such a big ego. I think now it makes the most sense for those two to now collide. I think probably next year. Really, though, that will signify, talking about jumping the shark, that will signify either the end of the beginning or the beginning of the end. I wish I didn't flub that up because that was a brilliant line that came out.
Paraphrase Winston Churchill while talking about crossover boxing. You deserve credit for that. I mean,
no, for sure. Subconscious, that's where that came from. But yeah, it will signify the end of the beginning or the beginning of the end because that's the two fights that people want to see. KSI's said outwardly that once he's fought Jake Paul, once he's beat Jake Paul from his perspective, he's done. He's not interested. So really, if you're DAZN, if you're Misfits, whatever, you actually want to keep him away from that fight to keep him going, to keep these events on, because really people want to see KSI and they're trying to build the stars on the undercard around it. So from that sense, that kind of gives me caution to say actually this fight does happen. But I do think KSI would rather get it done and rather than keep going and get this kind of boxing journey done, because after that first loss, where will his appetite be? I think we're likely to see it more than ever, but it's still a little bit unlikely for me.
Now, before we move on to our final subject, and before Ayman inevitably mutes himself once again, SW Boxing, Steve's back. He sprayed the crops, he's collected the eggs, and he's come back to join us. He says the Dolphin would need a bigger ring so it could circle the perimeter. That might be the comment of the day. Well done, Steve. Arfan Rashid says, shame Tommy didn't lamp him. I'm sure that echoes the thoughts of many people. Ainsley Shand, I know that's... Oh, yeah, he says okay, cool, missed that, pal. It's still there on playback, Ainsley. Go and watch it. Go and watch all of them. Have like a watch party all night. Invite some friends round, get some pizzas in, and go through the back catalogue of SO Live. I can't think of anything better. Crypto Jester says Tommy doesn't have the skill to continue on the pro path. If one thing was proven is that he's on the same level as these YouTubers. Perhaps he's fighting down to the level of opposition. Perhaps his fight camps replicate that level of opposition. It's hard to say without knowing for sure. But I think we are about to move on. But before we do, Mod Mother Queever, if you can hear me, please can you present the results of the poll? We asked you guys in the chat, has crossover boxing jumped the shark? And it's gone 59% yes, 40% no, which is quite close considering I would imagine we've got quite a hardcore section of the boxing community watching this show and voting in the live chat. So, yeah, a lot closer than I thought it was going to be. Maybe there's life left in crossover boxing yet. Ayman?
Yeah, look, it's a surprise. It's just pulling the poll up myself. Look, I don't think it has. Our kind of audience is more kind of the traditional boxing sense. I know we've got a strong crossover boxing audience, but look, maybe that's the response there. To be honest with you, I still think there's life in this. I still think there's legs in this. We'll see soon. We'll see how Jarvis does in your call. I'm inclined to believe that will sell out, and they'll have a good event there. We'll see if there's talk of another prime card as well too. We'll see from KSI's videos too as well if he has the appetite to continue as well. I think those are the big markers. We'll see what DAZN are going to put into in terms of how many fights they want this year, how many events they want this year from the crossover sphere, and if it increases from the last year. That's what's going to be the real tell for me.
And now, thankfully, gratefully, it's time to move on to real boxing. Let's get real boxing back.
Boo!
And it won't do the same amount of, it won't have the same attendance. It won't do the same amount of, it's not on pay-per-view, so it certainly won't do the same amount of pay-per-view buys. But in Joshua Buatsi against Dan Aziz, we have arguably, well, not arguably actually, two of the top three light heavyweights in Britain and the top two in the world for the World Boxing Association, the WBA. This is effectively, maybe officially, a final eliminator for Dimitri Bivol's WBA light heavyweight title between close friends, at least until about 8 weeks ago when the fight was confirmed, and not quite bitter enemies now, but certainly rivals, Joshua Buatsi and Dan Aziz. You got Buatsi, the Olympic medalist, A side of the promotion most of the way through his career, headline shows, main events, with Matchroom for a long time now, with Boxer, all the pedigree, would appear to be with him, but he's had a stop-start career. There's been a bit of inactivity, changing of trainers and so on. And then you've got Danis, who's more of a hard scrabble story, come up on undercards and on the away side of the fight bill as well at times. He's done it the traditional way. He's won the Southern Area title. He's won the British title. He's won the Commonwealth title. I could just list them all. I will. He's won the European title. And now he bids for a WBA title shot, but he's got to go through one of his closest friends to get there. It has all the ingredients, and I know people will, demean it a bit by calling it a trade fight. And in essence, it is, because they're not big talkers. They're not huge crossover stars, at least not yet. But they are both super talented, uber hungry. And I can't imagine the fight will be anything more than a absolute barnstormer on Saturday night. Ayman, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And it's like this is a proper advert for traditional boxing fans. This is a proper advert for boxing in general. This is a proper advert for the areas that Buatsi and Aziz represent. This is a proper advert for hopefully a star to be born in terms of matchmaking in this fight. And this is an advert for the spotlight that two fighters need to have been given and are getting as well too. Maybe you can be just get the cynical stuff out of the way. Maybe you should be thinking Aziz specifically could have been built his own way, didn't have to fight Joshua Buatsi. But really, should we be arguing that point when we want to see these type of fights? We want to see two fighters who are two of the best in Britain, as you mentioned, going at it to vie as to who is the better of the two. So really, we should be commending that. Sorry. But yeah, no, look, really good fight here. For me personally, have to favour Joshua Buatsi. I think he's seen the style of Aziz. It's hard to tell what type of fight this will turn out, because they know each other so well, because they've sparred so many rounds, because they've traded so many secrets and given each other tips throughout the years, because they know each other so well. So it's hard to kind of predict what sort of fight this is. But putting that to the side, and just in terms of the skill sets, that's what makes me favour Buatsi, just in terms of the opponents as well too. I think you made the point beforehand when we discussed it as well, and you might make it again, that Aziz is probably on a better run of form, a better amount of activity. But I don't think really activities are really shunted Buatsi's career, apart from actually having the fights. In terms of performances, I think he's always came and showed up. But look, the one real barometer for me, a fight that I pick out for Buatsi to say, look, this is someone who does have it, is the fight against Marko Kalic, where he came unstuck a little bit, had that big lump on his eye, was in a bit of a state there, and then really pulled out the bag to finish off his opponent. I thought that was a real barometer for me. That was a real check mark for me. And I think Aziz he's not like Kalic in that sort of way, but he's going to give that heavy level. He's going to give it all. He's going to give those moments to Buatsi, and I see him coming through that, and I think he gets the victory here.
Andre Rodenko says, does the winner of Buatsi Aziz have a better win than Anthony Yarde, and should the winner then skip Yarde and fight for titles next? I mean, I think they will skip Yarde and fight for titles next, purely because it is a de facto, or maybe even an official, I need to check, WBA final eliminator, so they will be next in line for Dimitri Bivol. It's number 1 against number 2. But yes, it would be a better win than anything on Yarde's record. Yarde is known, and rightfully so, by the impressive efforts he's given in defeat against Kovalev and more recently Beterbiev. He performed very, very well, admirably in those fights. But in terms of what's the best win on his record, it won't come close to Aziz or Buatsi, and that's no disrespect in saying that. The Keggy says Buatsi and Aziz are both British level at best. I take issue with that, not least because Aziz is the European champion. So, arguably the best fighter in Europe that doesn't have a world title. Because obviously I realise that both Beterbiev and Bivol are from Europe. But yeah, so I wouldn't say they're British level at best. I'd say Buatsi's had enough kind of fringe fights as well to suggest he's beyond domestic level. So I think that's a little unfair. Maybe a better point would be that they probably shouldn't be regarded as the top 2 contenders in the world necessarily. But then they've both won the fights they needed to win to get in that position with the WBA, and had, I think in Buatsi's case, like an inter belt and stuff as well with that organisation. So it's understandable. Neither Buatsi or Aziz will ever be stars. Come on. Yeah, I've made that point already. I don't know if they'll never be stars, but at the moment, they're certainly not crossover celebrities or anything like that. But it will be a really, really good fight. And I think what Ayman was saying earlier about the inactivity, I don't think it helps Buatsi because I think he takes time to warm up. I don't think he's a particularly fast starter, and he can labour in fights, particularly when it's tight or it's technical. And when he's under pressure, like you said against Kalic, it kind of brings him out of his shell a bit, wakes him up. But I think when he's in more of a technical chess match type of fight, he can kind of labour a little bit. He can become one-paced, or his one-paced nature is more evident in fights like that. I think we saw that against Craig Richards, for example. I think Richards, if he'd have pearled it on a bit more towards the end, probably could have nicked that fight. I think Buatsi, especially when he's had a fair bit of time off and then he returns to the ring, he's not as dynamic as he has been when he's on a regular run of activity, and we haven't seen that enough in his career. I think in terms of pure ability and pedigree and amateur background, he's the better fighter, and on paper he should win. I'm sure he'll be the favourite with the bookies. But Dan Aziz has just built up great momentum. He's been fighting regularly, which I think is incredibly important in challenging fights for meaningful titles. He hasn't put a foot wrong on that trajectory. And most importantly of all, he's improving as he goes through those levels. Is Buatsi still improving as a fighter, having been an amateur from a young age and gone through the GB system, and now with Virgil Hunter, of course, as a pro, previously with other trainers? Is he still improving? I'm not sure. Dan Aziz now working with Buddy McGirt, of course. He's had fewer fights. His development, his apprenticeship, if you like, has been quite steep, but sensible at the same time. And I just think he brings all that momentum with him, and he's incredibly hungry. Dan Aziz was never supposed to be the poster boy. He was never supposed to be the guy that made it to the very top. He didn't go to the Olympics. He wasn't an amateur star. He didn't have a big name before he turned pro. There wasn't a queue of promoters wanting to hand him a massive signing on fee. He's had to do it the hard way, and he'll always have known Buatsi during that time. He'll have worked with Buatsi during that time. And he said when I interviewed him a few months ago that he thinks maybe Buatsi's treatment of him and opinion of him has changed in the last few months, and that Buatsi now is forced to see him as a competitor, an equal almost, whereas previously maybe he always saw him as someone he felt he was more elevated than, someone he felt he was above as a boxer. So friendship's temporarily out the window. And I think there is a case to say perhaps Aziz wants it more.
Yeah, no, I get your point here. The thing about Buatsi wanting it more, I'm not too sure about. I think Buatsi kind of gets a bit of unfair stick because he's so kind of laid back and mild-mannered and real kind of the kind of way he thinks and the way he kind of processes things is very different completely to the traditional boxer and the way they think. He's been very much meticulous in terms of the fights he wants, the way he wants to fight, the way he wants to operate, not really concerned about what people are saying. I think that kind of is something I don't personally kind of see with Buatsi. But look, you are right in everything that you say in terms of the way Aziz has been handled, the way Aziz has built up that momentum, the way Aziz has improved too in these last recent years. Boxer have done a real good job with him. I do kind of, I don't know, you're talking about kind of where the levels between the two over the time in that improvement that Aziz has had. I just see Buatsi as someone who is still that level above Aziz. I think I don't personally see, like, I can't envisage the real route to success for Dan Aziz in this fight. I think Buatsi should be able to handle that kind of style that Aziz operates under, and I think that's the real kind of thinking in terms of how I see the fight kind of going. I just think this is it really for Buatsi. When hopefully from his perspective, he gets the win, and then he's having that. There's no more waiting out Bivol. There's no more waiting out Beterbiev. There's no more waiting for Bivol and Beterbiev to go. There's no more picking another fight. This fight with Yard for either winner is a great fight. I'd love to see it, just not at a cost of a world title opportunity for either fighter. That might likely be to happen because of Buatsi wins, Aziz wins, Buatsi more so, the history that they've had with Hearn and wanting to make deals and such, for fights between the two has obviously led to some friction in the past, and that could scupper a potential fight in the future. which might lead to a yard fight. But I want to see either winner. And even more so, even for Aziz, because we've seen that ride, because he's been so unheralded, because he's worked under the circuit, for that to be dashed to the side and make the world title fight for both of them, because they both deserve it if they both deserve it if they get that outcome.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's a tricky one. I think for Dan Aziz, this will be the most important moment of his life so far. Whereas for Buatsi, he's competed for an Olympic medal previously. He's been there before. He's been on the big stage. He's kind of expected to win. Whereas for Dan Aziz, he'll use that people writing him off as more fuel to the fire. I don't know. I just think in a fight that could be quite close, that might be enough to push him over the edge. But I wouldn't be surprised, of course, if Buatsi does win. Larry Liston says, does any of you guys know what's happening with Felix Cash? Seems like the obvious next choice for a world title challenger. Yeah, I think Felix took some time away from the sport. He was bouncing around a couple of different trainers after leaving Tony Sims. And I think he does still plan to return to boxing, certainly, sooner rather than later. But I'm not sure if he's fully focused on the sport right now, is what I would say. The Keggy says, let's talk real boxing. David Adelaide versus Fabio Wardley for the British heavyweight title. I mean, that's certainly not a higher level than Buatsi Aziz. So I don't know if you were trying to be ironic there. But yeah, I think we have got time to talk about that, considering there's a press conference for Wardley against Adelaide tomorrow before they fly out, presumably to Riyadh, to be on that Fury and Ngannou card. One of the fights that I think a lot of people are really looking forward to on the Fury and Ngannou show, because it's British title fight, it's hard to call, and because they had a big dust up at the press conference as well. So let's hope they manage to stay away from each other long enough not to leave one of them pissing blood or whatever happened last time. But yeah, Ayman, really finely poised fight. Fabio Wardley on the cusp of entering world level, you would say, fringe world level, start to bring over some veteran names perhaps to test him. But he's got to get through David Adelaide first, who, despite one fight where it looked like he got the benefit of a very generous judge's decision, has really put a foot wrong.
Yes, accurate representation of both their careers so far. I completely agree, especially for Fabio Wardley, what you're saying. If he does come through it as well, that's the right path for him too. And Fabio is someone as well who, let's talk about white collar here. We were talking about Misfits boxing. He's a good transition over, isn't it? From that white collar scene into now the professional scene. A real success story for Fabio. And it was a kind of a case of, if I can remember what I said to him, it was a case of a little difference in perspective for Fabio. It was like, first of all, because it came from the white collar scene, how good is Fabio Wardley? And now it's become, how far can Fabio Wardley go? Because now he's shown the potential to be someone who could have success at a higher level in the sport, especially in the heavyweight division, where in a few years now, where he's still young enough, I believe, to wait out some of even after the Fury Nusic leave and maybe Hergovich get up there, he could still wait it out there as well too. Although opportunities come a bit quicker at heavyweight division if you wait your turn enough. But look, it's a real good fight between the two. British title on the line too, which was a bone of contention. I don't know if Danny, if you can plug in my knowledge gaps here as to how they managed to get that over the line there. But in terms of the fight as a whole, you look, David Adelaide had that, had that slip up, I guess, against Sokolov. So he came away with the victory, but has improved since. And I think that kind of stench of that fight has rubbed off of him now. No one really kind of points it out specifically. I think Fabio probably will point it out at the press conference as well, just to have a little dig. But that's gone now. And I think Adelaide has earned its opportunity here. You mentioned it's a finely poised fight, but I think the favour actually goes to Fabio Wardley. I think skill set wise, I think just in terms of what he's shown in the ring so far, I think he's shown more than what David Adelaide puts forward in the ring. Maybe David Adelaide could raise his game, but there was a moment there remember, it's coming to me now, Fabio Wardley versus Nathan Gorman. He took a real big shot from Nathan Gorman, who isn't a massive puncher, and Fabio Wardley took it, and it spurred him on. It made him want to go for the knockout, made him want to go for the kill. I could see that moment happening again, potentially. But this fight, regardless, ends in a knockout, I'm sure of it.
What was the other fight that Wardley had where almost exactly the same thing happened? It was a foreign opponent, though. It wasn't Gorman. He took a big shot when he was under pressure against the ropes, and then he suddenly roared back and stopped him.
Um,
I'll
trying
have
to
to have a
think.
look at his record, but
Yeah.
yeah, so it does seem like maybe he needs waking up. Maybe he is a little bit too casual, a little too lackadaisical before he gets involved in a real tear up, and then the lights go on, if you like. Yeah, I mean, you'd have to favour him given the experience he's got and fighting at a higher level. But Adelaide's obviously young, hungry, nothing to lose. Do you think there'll be any impact on Wardley in the ring from what happened outside the ring at the previous press conference? I know it wasn't Adelaide that actually cut him, but they're just kind of the intimidation factor and the fact that he might have been a bit embarrassed as well. Would that play into the mindset at all?
I think if the fight was any sooner, or if that had happened any sooner, potentially, I believe now Frank Warren was really annoyed at what happened there at the press conference, as they should be. Really, what happened shouldn't have happened. I wasn't there myself, and we obviously captured it, and it's made this great little moment there. But really, if you're looking at it from a Queen's perspective, security perspective, whatever, shouldn't have happened. They shouldn't be having the British champion who's coming over after being with Matchroom, just supposed to be treated right and not, be protected. And that happened. Not a great thing to have happened, but pushing that aside for a second, Fabio, the way he approaches things and the way I see him on social media, having spoken to him and stuff, he's really good at kind of separating the emotion away from the task at hand. And he'll have had that time now to have that downtime to be really pissed off about it, to really, really be pissed off about it, and then kind of cool down and realize, look, I'm going to do my job here. I'm annoyed at David. I want to get at David. I want to knock him out, but I want to win. I've proven now I'm British champion. I've proven now that I've got potential to move on forward. I'm going to get the win here, dispose of David Adelaide, and then move on forward. And it won't affect them as much. If David tries to do the same sort of thing, I think Fabio will have dealt with it now because he knows what's coming. He's got an expectation of what's coming because it was quite pally beforehand. Remember when it was at Joshua Franklin where they met before and Adelaide was pushing for the fight. And it was okay between the two, bit of banter between the two. You weren't expecting that from David. But Fabio's now seen that side to him. David's played his hand here. That's what's happened here. And I think in Saudi, of all places, they're less likely for that sort of thing to happen as well too. From David's perspective as well. Look, I think if you look at it brutally, it's a 1-0 for David. I think you've laid your mark down. You've said what you're about here. You've made your intentions clear that I'm looking to rip that belt of you however I need to. I think it was a great score for David. Don't think it should have happened. Don't agree that it should have happened. But looking at how it is and the lay of the land right now, David has the upper hand. It's just how Fabio deals with it. I think he will deal with that happening appropriately.
Yeah, if they try and pull that shit in Saudi, it'll be like a reverse Bomac situation, wouldn't it? Banged Up Abroad. Used to love Banged Up Abroad as a TV show, but yeah, going off on a tangent. As we're answering questions just before we round off, Larry Liston says, what's the next step for Jack Catterall? And it's important because he's fighting Jorge Linares, main event of Matchroom's Liverpool show this weekend, which Ayman will be attending. He says, should Catterall rematch Josh Taylor if he wins, or should he try to fight Teofimo for the big money in the US? Before I hand over to Ayman, I've just got to say, if he wins, he's definitely going to win. Jorge Linares is a shell of what he once was. Great fighter in his day, three-weight world champion, absolutely exquisite to watch at times as well. But his heyday was many years ago now, and it wasn't at super lightweight either. In fact, I'm not sure he's won at super lightweight. I think most of his wins have been at lightweight. He stepped up memorably to super lightweight against Pablo Cesar Cano that time and got absolutely obliterated. I'm not sure Jack will do similar, or at least not as early, but I think he will certainly win the fight. But yeah, should he rematch Josh Taylor if he wins, or should he try to fight Teofimo for the big money in the States? Ayman?
I think, look, interest has waned on Josh Taylor versus Jack Catterall, the rematch. However, it's not gone out of the minds of people who watched it. It was a real big deal. It was a bit of a slip up from a boxer perspective to not get that rematch done pretty quickly. It could have been to a lesser degree, it would have been, but it still could have been a bit of a launch pad for him, a Froch Groves sort of moment for them to really garner further momentum into pushing boxers' brand to not have had that rematch. But it still lasts in the mind for boxing fans. I think there's a lot of currency there to do that rematch. If you're Jack Catterall, who's beaten him, and you say, I beat you resoundingly, you're Josh Taylor, who's looks like he's showing signs of slipping or signs of not being at the good Josh Taylor, the brilliant Josh Taylor, the undisputed Josh Taylor that we've seen beforehand. You're kind of thinking, look, this rematch keeps making more and more and more sense for me to take on, to dust it off, to make a star of myself as well, to really cement myself as well. Because Jack, look, he doesn't really do that, outside of the ring, outside of the interviews and stuff. He does his obligations, but that side of him is lacking. But what will do, even though Josh has been on the decline a little bit for now, and they're looking to stem that, a win over Josh Taylor, a former undisputed champion for Jack Catchall, is a great look to actually have it on paper, on your record. They can then get to Teofimo Lopez after the fact.
And Andre Radenko, I'm going to take this question because I know you've posted it twice. I don't want you to think we're ignoring you. He asked about the thoughts on BBBFC licensed members taking British under-18s to Mexico to turn pro when they're not old enough here. This is honestly the first I've heard of it. But it wouldn't be anything new on a global scale. There's been trainers and gyms in America that have taken their fighters south of the border to turn their fighters over professional many times in the past. It's why you see so many fighters who manage to turn pro at various ages, but 17, 16 or whatever. I think if they feel it's the best route for their guy, if they know he's not got a future in the amateur game and they want them to, pick up the professional style earlier, and, you're just not allowed to here in this country, I don't have a massive problem with it. The only issue is that their brain and the rest of their body, for that matter, haven't stopped fully growing at the age of 16 or 17. So having those smaller gloves and, potentially punishing fights out in Mexico as well might not be the best thing for a still developing brain. But that's for people who know a lot more about medicine and anatomy than I do. The Keggy thinks they should get a 12-month ban from the BBBFC. I mean, if it gets proven, I'm sure that would be the case, but let's wait and see. Haney had his first 12 fights in Mexico, says Larry Liston. Canelo fought when he was 15 against grown men. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a tradition, though, isn't it, in Mexico to turn pro early? They haven't got a superb amateur program or anything like that. It's just something that has always been done in that part of the world. But we've not really heard of it happening in Britain before, at least to my knowledge. But I think that's just about us done here. But I really appreciate everyone watching. Please do give us a thumbs up if you haven't already, and subscribe as well. If you're watching this on playback, please add your comments because we do read them even after the event. And we'll be back with SO Live next Monday, again at 5 p.m. with all the fallout from Buatsi Aziz. Hopefully not a real fallout. Let's hope they can all be friends again, whoever comes out victorious on Saturday night. And looking ahead to the opening of Riyadh season, perhaps Ayman will wear a Riyadh season cap that time, as we talk about Fury and Francis Ngannou going at it. Ayman, closing remarks.
Yeah, look, you had a bunch of, two misfits here on the screen talking to you for about an hour, so I really appreciate you all joining us. Misfits in the chat too, so make sure you hit the like and subscribe button because we've got much more boxing content coming your way on Seconds Out, especially obviously with the fight weeks coming forward. Buatsi Aziz stands to be a really good fight. I'm sure there'll be some good fights as well in the Catchall Linares undercard too. We'll keep you abreast of all that action. I know Danny doesn't like to be kept abreast, but we will keep you abreast of all the latest developments in boxing as well too. So keep it tuned into Seconds Out. We'll see you very soon.
Two misfits in our prime.
There it is.
that was the cue for the outro.
Let's go, keep it.